let's go to the SEC, where we have Max's own Florida Gators, Tennessee Vols. To me, it was the game of the week last week, and I think it lived up to those expectations. I mean, an onside kick down the stretch with a potential chance to go down and Florida sneak a win late, as you alluded to. Anthony Richardson was phenomenal to me. I think that's the highest of highs for when we say Anthony Richardson can belong in a top 5 quarterback in the country spot. He showed some of that this weekend. However, Tennessee gets it done. Hendon Hooker with a really, really big day. And now everything is in front of the Tennessee Volunteers. So here's the overreaction. Tennessee can now win the SEC East. And if you don't know, that's where Georgia plays, folks. Max, we got to go to you first. You're our SEC guy. How crazy is that statement?
I still think it's crazy because that defense obviously gave up those 400-plus yards to Anthony Richardson and allowed for Florida to get back into that game. Tennessee should have handled that game a lot better, but allowing the bombs, allowing Anthony Richardson to do Anthony Richardson-type things with his legs. I really like them to be the number 2 team in the SEC East. I wouldn't put it past them to be a New Year's 6 candidate. But college football playoffs, I mean, Georgia, I saw Georgia 2 weeks ago against South Carolina. And even though they want to talk about this Kent State game, just remember the tight end took an end around 75 yards for a touchdown. A jet sweep motion for a touchdown from a tight end.
How does that happen?
Because as DJ Khaled likes to say, God did when he made him. He did. I mean, that's essentially what it is. I mean, that dude is just a freak of nature. You're talking about a guy who can go catch. He can run routes with the best of receivers.
Yeah.
I mean, seam routes, he's unblockable. And this dude's taking end arounds literally every game. He's busting it for 18, now 75 yards for the tutty. That squad, they start playing their third string midway through the second quarter. Stetson Bennett does not play into the fourth quarter normally in games. So the fact that you have that luxury of depth to be able to do that, that's why I don't think that anybody's going to be able to shake a leg at Georgia this year. I think they're destined for on a collision course to go and honestly, I think beat Alabama. I don't think Alabama's that good. If we're talking about overreactions, I think Alabama is not as good as people think they are.
Wow. So we're going to get into Alabama, I think, later this week in a couple different ways. For tonight, though, Georgia, you're talking about how they're still the top dog. They're still number 1 in our Field of 12 power rankings, by the way. We haven't displaced them at all. Stetson Bennett was number 1 on the Field of 12 Heisman rankings last week. He is no longer in the top 5 after what you would say is a rough day compared to the other big quarterbacks in the country. Brock Bowers did jump up. He is in the top 5 at 5 for the record. But I guess my only pushback here on Georgia right now would be it's very easy to say they're the best in the country because I think they are. They're the most talented. How does a team like Kent State stay in a game with Georgia for 60 minutes, though? Because to me, that sort of happened, right, Felder?
Yeah. So here's the thing. And we talked about this on Saturday night on the Field of 12 After Dark with Clint Sterner and with Christian Hackenberg. And they talked about the difference between declaration versus confusion. And you won't confuse Georgia, but if you force them to declare what they're doing, then you at least know what you're supposed to do. Does that make sense, Max? Where if you create these, because Kent State, we saw them use those wide splits.
Humongous splits. I mean,
huge
almost
splits.
Sidelines, yeah.
Which is what Tennessee does as well, which is why Tennessee is going to have an advantage over teams, maybe like a Kentucky, if you will, that will try to tighten things up and confuse you with exchanges. Who's 1, who's 2, who's 3, confuse you with exchanges versus forcing you to show everything that you're going to do. Then they have a decision already made because you're wrong pre-snap. And I think that's going to be the interesting part of this football game. But you look at what Tennessee has, and the big thing for me, and to circle back to like, obviously with Georgia, I think they are still the number 1 team in the country, and they should be. And I love Stetson Bennett on the move. I love it. And the fact that Darnell Washington's getting the football, you're giving the ball to a guy that's literally built like he's some sort of a transformer. Like
He's a monster. He's a monster, guys.
Yeah.
Let's just put it that way. He's a young monster.
he's the same size as LeBron James, basically. Like, what are we doing?
Yeah, those guys aren't everywhere, gentlemen. That's not a normal thing in the world.
There's a handful of them
room in the country, and I'm including the NFL.
Yeah.
Between him, Oscar Delp, and Brock Bowers, and then whenever we see Eric Gilbert, I mean, tell me a better four.
No, you won't.
NFL. There's no room.
Yeah.
So looking ahead for Tennessee, they have Alabama and Kentucky at home this year. Some would say that's a break. Some would say, well, it's not a break because they have to play Alabama. Alabama's not in this division. If they did not have to play Alabama, you could convince yourself maybe it's just the winner of Tennessee, Georgia comes out of the SEC East. What do you think Tennessee has to do given that schedule? Can they just beat Georgia and lose another game and still get there? Or do they need to truly run the table through what is sort of a gauntlet schedule, even though they have some big home games? Max, what do you think?
I think you have to beat Georgia. You got to beat your division. That at the end of the day, we can overlook Bama, right? Because that's a Western foe. That's a crossover game. You've got to dominate the East if you want a shot at having the East crown and getting to Atlanta for the SEC championship game. You can't afford to lose. If you lose to Georgia, just take the 10 wins and call it a day.
And it's at Georgia.
Yeah, it is between the hedges. Sanford State.
Taking 10 wins should feel like success, but we're getting so hype on them that like 10 wins almost feels like, oh, well, what if we just did this? Or what if we only got that? And that's the scary part.
In year 2 under Josh Heupel, by the way.
Yeah.
And we're parsing the straws about 10 wins if it's good enough. But the fact that he's changed this over, and also let's say he finally got the right quarterback in Hendon Hooker.
Yes.
Can we at least say that? I mean, if Hendon Hooker has a good day and they still lose to Georgia, or they still lose to Alabama, I still like Hendon Hooker as my dark horse. Not saying he's top 5, put him in the top 6 for the Heisman race because I think he earned it in this last game. Throwing for over 300 yards and then also rushing for over 100 yards to will Tennessee over the hump for my team, who's been a bugaboo for them for the last decade plus.
Can I just
get off their back?
You said will, so I want to get you guys 2 thoughts. Where does Will Levis in Kentucky fit in this entire package?
I mean, it's about as good as him eating a whole banana. Still included. I don't think Will gets in the upper echelon conversation. I think he's an upgrade. And I think because of what we've known for Kentucky quarterbacks to be as of late, he's an upgrade from that. But I think he's a good quarterback. He's not a great quarterback. He handles the game. Kentucky's still a team that's predicated on the run. Like the run has to be set up for the passing game to go. Hendon Hooker is the run and the pass. Like, if they want to win, it's because of him. Whereas Will Levis, he's there as a part of the win.
461 total yards for Hendon Hooker this week, 3 touchdowns. He is up to 3rd on the field of 12 Heisman rankings right now. Felder, is he the top dual threat quarterback in the country?
I mean, we still got Caleb Williams in the mix, right?
I would throw Caleb Williams exactly in that mix, coming off what was kind of a stinker in the Oregon State game.
I mean, I know we're going to get to that. I would put Hendon Hooker up there. Yeah. Especially because here's the thing. Bryce Young and CJ Stroud can be dual threat quarterbacks if they want to.
Yeah. They
just don't want to. So I guess but Bryce Young ran for 100 yards to start the season. So it's yes, I think he's a top 2, top 3 dual threat quarterback. But I also realize that there are a couple guys that I don't know if they're holding their offenses back, but they are holding that part of their game back because they don't want to be labeled as dual threat. They don't be labeled as running quarterbacks. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, 100%. I think, your point about CJ and Bryce to me, like whether it's want to or even need to sometimes, like I think
right.
Hendon Hooker has to make plays on the run at times in order for Tennessee to hang in games. against the best of the best, right? Yeah. When you're the quarterback at Georgia or the quarterback at Alabama, you're just not going to face.
By the way, Stetson Bennett as a dual threat. We also need to put him in there. Man's out. He's juking out there. This guy he's hitting his R2s and his L2s.
That guy's a technician. He knows exactly. He probably has that little turbo button underneath on the controller. You know that little hidden button that we know about. You see the two top toggles. He has that little button on the bottom. But yeah, and Stetson surprised me in that South Carolina game as much as he rushed in that game, putting him on the move and seeing what he can do as far as throwing on sprint outs and giving him the RPO two-way goes. But I completely agree with you. I think Hendon Hooker has to be in that top 2-3 conversation. And I wonder, let me pose this question to you guys. Do you think it's Ohio State and Alabama's offense holding back before they get into the meat of league play and they don't want to unveil it, trying to stay a little bit more vanilla and save that dimension for later in the year?
I think it is these quarterbacks, especially because I went through preseason. These guys, you know how many total yards they had rushing, including sacks, obviously. They had 5 yards combined rushing. 5 combined. CJ Stroud and Bryce Young had 5 rushing yards combined through 2 seasons as starters. And I think it's because they don't want to get that Lamar Jackson label. They don't want to have, Stephen A. Smith on ESPN telling them that they are more of a runner than a thrower. They don't want that.
But and Lamar Jackson is also the top quarterback in the league right now and has working on his second MVP as we speak, which is
I agree.
Hey, blank check. Just here you go. Here you go, Lamar. Here's the pen.
I agree.
Yeah. But you're right. I can see how that stigma is going to affect. But you look at the Deshaun Watsons of the world, the Russell Wilsons, right? Where it is a positive, but you see the Lamar Jackson and you think the Michael Vicks and such. And it's sad to say that, but because they have good arms and they can also have good legs.
I think they're very worried. They're focused on avoiding the stigma of that, which it shouldn't be a stigma. It should be an advantage, which is what I think we're going to get with Caleb Williams and Anthony Richardson. And I think that's the next phase that we have to get to.
We're dropping our merch.
We got to start calling Underwood Daddy Brad. But I'm a big pod guy. Breaking news. The Field of 68 has an online store, and it's your one-stop shop for the latest and greatest merch in college basketball and college football. You can find shirts to support your favorite team, make fun of your rival team, or boast Field of 68 catchphrases like Daddy Brad, Cussin' and Discussin', and the Star Heels. Go to www.fieldof68.shop today and enter promo code TOUCHDOWN for 20% off at checkout.